Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to some of you, and peace out to the rest of you. Hit the share button because the message is more important than the messenger. First thing I'm going to do is give some thanks to S Jacques as a sponsor of this particular upload. He's come through on the Cash App, and he's also sent to me links to international news. Since I live abroad, I get a perspective and opportunities in this perspective. And I also wanted to show you guys what else I've been able to learn through him, because one perspective comes from where you live, and another perspective comes from being able to find international news from other parts of the world where you don't live, but that you would not get if you lived in the States, because it is largely news insulated. I don't know how news insulated Canada is, but the United States is heavily news insulated. S Jacques sent to me links that have shown me the following, and I'm going to tie them together in terms of what they mean. Number one, when during the colonial era, there was some ethnic groups that ran away from Namibia, and Germans were pretty heavy-handed there. I mean, they committed some genocides there long before Hitler was born. Now you have some of them returning. And as they're returning, Namibia is welcoming them back. Another thing that's happening is that the Ukraine, in its desperation, is cracking down on people that might be dodging the draft, or they may not be. It's crazy, but some of them are just being picked up and detained, and they're told, you're not getting out until you go into combat. Why does that matter to us? One of the reasons that that matters to us is because the Ukraine is actually a state allied with white supremacists within its boundaries. Russia is a state in which some white supremacists may wind up living, but it's not allied with white supremacists. I think your average Russian would want to remain white and keep their bloodline white, but I don't think the average Russian is walking around thinking about downtrodden us or trotting down upon us. The average Ukrainian might think about that if you brought the subject up to them, but right now they got to think about fighting with Russia. You see where I'm going with this? The Ukraine did not want to let black people out. They were willing to let out Ukrainians that were either women or men not of fighting age. The Ukrainians were willing to let out other whites, but they weren't willing to let Africans out. Stop and think about that. They weren't going to let Africans out of the Ukraine. The Russians had to come in, find Africans stranded, and say to them, okay, listen, you can use our lines to go back into Russia, and then you will be repatriated. Now, how do the soldiers know what to tell these Africans? That means they already had orders. Okay, retrace our lines, go back into Russia. You're going to be lodged in Russia and then flown back and repatriated back to your country. Russia did that. Stop and think about that. Russia was cool with that. So we clearly have one neutral party that says you may remain neutral. We are not asking for your support. And another party that is trying to court African nations and black folks in general and say, why don't you stay here and help us fight against the Russians? That's the Ukraine doing that. At the same time Russia's doing this, Russia's making other international moves that are more about diplomacy. They're in a partnership so that Burkina Faso does not, so the Burkina Faso does not have to rely on the CFA the currency anymore, which France does not use, but prints and produces just so that they can have a financial stranglehold on their former colonies of West Africa. Instead of printing their own francs that they used to have, they're now printing a franc for the former colonies in West Africa while they use the euro. And Burkina Faso is now saying, screw you. And Niger is pretty much saying, we're not even going to maintain French place names for geographical and historical sites anymore. Shuck that fit. They're renaming. Now that's symbolic, but Niger has made moves that are not symbolic. I mean, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso have this tri-state alliance, and other nations in Africa are welcome to join. And Russia's even saying, listen, we're going to help Ibrahim Traore. We're going to help that particular president to maintain his own security because you keep getting these assassination attempts against him, and ain't nobody interested in that except the U.S. and France. I've been knowing that. I'm going to tell y'all straight away, man. What we're witnessing is similar to what happened in the 60s when people began to awaken, nations. And they began to say, well, you know what, just like after the Bandung conference of the 40s, then Malcolm began to make us aware of an international current running against white supremacy. And he inspired them as well. They took inspiration from Malcolm, and we took knowledge and awareness of this from Malcolm. Malcolm touted Algeria as an example of the revolutionary spirit. They were promised full integration into France as not a colony, but a part of France. And they said, we want freedom, not France. Malcolm said this. His grandson's father is an Algerian. Algeria has had a revolutionary spirit for a while. And as a matter of fact, when the Organization of African Unity was still relatively new, there were times when the Black Africans had to tell some of them North Africans, y'all need to calm down, man. It's like y'all just want to run up in Europe and kill them white folk before we even build Africa up. Yes, there was a time when they were considered to be the Casablanca coalition within the African unity. And it was Western Africans that were telling them, calm down. We're not interested in wiping them out. We'll build up our own countries. We're new. We're free from them now. And they were like, no, man, you don't know what they did. It was them that were like that at that point. And now what we're seeing is an international resurgence in this resistance. And what I don't want Black American or continental Black Africans to do is to make the mistake of merely jockeying for a more comfortable position within its umbrella. I think we should jockey for more comfortable positions no matter who's in charge. But I don't think we should sit up and simply say, well, we'll keep Massa in charge because now he's going to pay us reparations. No, the hell he's not. See, white supremacy has had certain things they don't compromise on as foreign policy and not paying us reparations. They're not doing that. Foreign policy, in other words, meaning Israel and Palestine. They're not going to change the support from Israel to Palestine. They're not going to support Palestine against Israel. And it's one of the reasons why it's now encountering this international resistance that it is encountering. I'm not telling you that we got people that love us everywhere you go. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that we have people that at the very least are involved in fighting a common enemy. If you don't like them folk, at least don't get in the way of them fighting this common enemy. That's what I'm saying. And I've admitted Black folk can't afford to necessarily have too much solidarity with Palestinians, but that's largely because of how we are, not because of how they are. See, we have this thing where some of us still tend to look at whether or not they want to marry us to decide if the common enemy is worth fighting together. The Palestinian that is not black may not want to marry us and risk making their own bloodline darker. They may not care. It could go either way. But the enemy that they have and that we have does not believe that we should even exist and that we should marry each other. They don't even want that. The enemy that we have will take Ethiopians that subscribe to and practice the same religion to which this enemy merely makes claims, and then will turn around and sterilize them while putting them in the army to fight against people that ain't never done nothing to them, us, me, or you. In other words, the Palestinian may not want to marry us. They're not our enemy, though. But the enemy to the Palestinians doesn't want you and me marrying each other at all unless we're sterilized so that our complexions will end, that of the Palestinians and that of us Africans. They'll have us missing the forest for the trees if they can. And I don't want us to make that mistake. This is the common thread that is running between the different links that S Jacques has sent me, whether he realized it or not. And when this nasty nation that is responsible for the oppression of Palestinians killed Yahya Sinwar, they did it overkill. They sent a missile into his building, injured him, then sent a drone to see which state in which they would find him, and then shot him from the drone. That's who the hell they are. And when, in response to this, the Cuban president led demonstrations and protests against Israel. People are getting tired of this. You got white folk getting tired of white supremacy. Fidel Castro was considered to be a white Cuban, and he was sick of the white supremacy within Cuba. I'm not telling you he was my hero per se, no. I'm not saying that. You can't be an atheist and be my hero. But what I am telling you is that he was tired of that much. There are people that are white and don't want white supremacy. They exist. And I'm not telling you that they're always heroes or not. But what I'm telling you is that they do exist. So this means that you're going to see some people that are not white and they're sick and tired of white supremacy. And if you don't trust them enough to ally yourselves with them and share secrets, fine. Do not get in their way. Because quiet as is kept, Palestinians and their resistance have been the reason that their enemies have not expanded further out and begun to affect Africa too. And I mean Black Africa. Had it not been for that resistance that they encountered, Black East Africa would have started, they would have been the first ones in trouble, and then would have spread from Chad on further west and south. So I, for one, while I will say, listen, Palestinians, I'm not saying that we should go out there and risk our own necks on your behalf. I don't know if you would do it for us, but unknowingly you have already done it, and I tip my hat to you for it. And I would more vehemently tell Black folks to never act against Palestine if that was even a discussion that's on the table. Because those Black folk, we sometimes tend to get caught up in, well, who would be willing to marry us and darken their bloodlines, even if we're not trying to marry them, and using that to determine whether or not someone really respects us as equals or not, instead of understanding that the one that doesn't respect you as an equal truly doesn't is the one that doesn't even want you marrying each other. The world is becoming more oppositional to white supremacy in stages. And I would love to see Black men from the continent, from the Caribbean, and from the mainland Americas, Anglophone, Francophone, Spanophone, or Lusophone, get in front of this. Instead of us taking delineation, meaning distinction, as far as division amongst ourselves, I'd rather see us just merely be aware of our distinctions, which is normal, regular delineation, but be willing to cooperate with each other to get in front of this particular international resistance to our real true enemy, which is a bunch of damn racists, both coming out of Western Europe, few parts of Eastern Europe, not all of it, and North America, and give them the collective middle finger. I'd rather see us get in front of that. That's what I would rather see. I say this as a man who tells you, brothers, that you don't need to be chasing after no sisters in the West, especially because they wouldn't pursue you. I say it as the same man that tells you this, but I want you to realize that while AC, accountable commentary, sees a pattern that is international of sisters being hypermasculine and emasculating, while he sees this pattern, I'm not going to tell you that it's all over Africa. What I'm telling you is that he's not making it up because there's still this pattern within Africa. And you can be aware of that pattern within Africa that is manifested in greater degrees in the Americas, and you can still be willing to work with international, at least interest sharers against white supremacy, a common enemy. Those two are not mutually exclusive. If you, as a black man of any nationality, are willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with someone that's going to oppose white supremacy, they're not going to turn to you and ask you, well, why aren't you pursuing that black woman over there? They're not going to ask you that because they can also understand that while you might be willing to work with them against it, that doesn't mean that because you're against white supremacy, that you're going to turn around and lower your self-worth and value to go pursue a woman who's already in favor of white supremacy and can't stand you no way. That's what I want you to understand. You see, AC is right about this being an international black phenomena amongst many of the women to try to sell you out. I'll tell you about the Sudanese. The men and the women alike are generally nice people and they're known for being very honest. I give them credit for that. But, you know, when it comes down to the way that the women view the men, it can be pretty bad. They got proverbs just for Sudan, not for the Arabic language, but just for Sudan, that pretty much depict men who live to a ripe old age as being cowards. I kid you not. The only men that could be sources of such proverbs would be those who internalized the misandry. Did you know that, truth be told, when you see many of these old videos of the Haram in Mecca and you see these black men that were like just servants of that area, all they did was just, you know, help pilgrims. These guys, I'm going to tell you, many of them were missing the testes. And some of you would say, oh man, we need to get them Arabs for all that. You don't know how they lost them. Now, I'm not talking about in ancient history. I'm not talking about at that time, although what I'm about to tell you does apply to then and also to the 1900s. But here's the truth. The truth is that in some of these markets in Sudan, you had mothers that would take a son, not all of them, but they would take a son and nut that son, neuter the son themselves, take him to a market and then say, he will have no interest in the women of your household. Oh, yeah. I wish I was making that up. It was some black Muslim men that talked about this. They were against any form of white supremacy, especially coming from any Muslim that's not black. They really don't tolerate that. But they admitted, I'm not going to tell you the group, but they admitted to each other that they were aware of black African mothers being willing to do certain things to their own sons' anatomy so as to make them more valuable to rich Arabs that might be trying to get a servant for their household. I don't tell you that accountable commentary is right if he thinks it's all of Africa that's the same. I'm telling you that he is right to notice that it is more international than what we think. It ain't just American Keisha. It ain't just Bonquisha from Boston or Boom Shika from Baltimore. That's a problem. And you can be aware of that, and you can still be willing to stand out in the front of this opposition to white supremacy that's now becoming more international, and say to these others that are beginning to agree with this, well, it's about damn time. What the hell took you so long? You know what? Now that you got this thing started, we're still going to stand at the helm of this as leaders because we did start this. It was us. Gandhi learned resistance from the same Black South Africans he never wanted his people to be compared to or treated as equals. And he may have repented for his racist views. I still don't think he should be our hero. If he truly repented for his racist views sufficiently, I think he did, but not sufficiently. But if he did it sufficiently, I think he was set up and said, they are the heroes. He would have set up and said African resistance fighters were the heroes of India. He never said that I know of. That's the end of that. It's becoming more international. That's a good thing for us if we know what to do next. And I thank S Jacques for making me more aware of that. I could have told you about what some people's attitudes were in the kingdom. Because of him, I'm able to tell you about the attitudes of different groups of people in and outside the kingdom. So I don't just send him a thank you and a shout out. I also want you all to thank him as well for that. So that I could turn around and make you a bit more aware. And I really do appreciate that from the bottom of my black heart and from the depths of my black mind. My awareness that the Palestinians who are resisting Israel right now, unknowingly, of course, are actually working in our interest in keeping this monster off of us is something that I became aware of through I knew about the resistance, but what it means for us, I became aware, or rather how I would benefit from that, I became aware of from my wife and from S Jacques in the same weekend, coincidentally, without them ever having known each other. You see, quiet as it's kept, Muslims were the reason that the Native Americans did not get wiped out sooner than they wound up being almost wiped out. That's the truth of the matter. The Reconquista of Spain was the beginning of the end for the original Americans. That's the truth. Because those who reconquered Spain were monsters, savages themselves. And it became apparent and manifest when they finally went to the New World because of Columbus realizing or proving to them that you could reach land sailing west. That's the truth. So as long as the Moors were running the show in Spain, the Native Americans were generally safe, at least from outright genocide and pestilence, at the very least. Because the Moors were keeping a monster subdued. And I would like to thank the Palestinian resistance for doing the same thing, because if that monster was not subdued and did not encounter resistance there, and they were able to expand freely, well, that would be bad not only for its immediate neighbors, but even for those of us in Africa. And while we're not willing to self-sacrifice, and I don't think that we should, I also do believe in giving people credit where it's due. And sometimes acting in your own best interest means acting in the interest of another group of people that are already unknowingly acting in yours. I hope that what I've said is a benefit, and I thank you for listening. And I thank S Jacques for his support and for his knowledge. And I thank my wife for helping me to realize this, what I've explained to you as well now, too. May this benefit you. Thank you for listening. And as always, Black Heart, Black Mind, Black Out, Assalamu Alaikum, and Black heterosexual non-select male power because they don't like it, and Black patriarchy until extinction of Judgment Day. Thank you for flying with us again here on Jet Black Airways, where the phrase jet black is also a verb. Keep jetting black with us till the wings and the wheels fall off. Gender, justice, forever.